Hi everyone, and welcome to the SEEC webinar about low-cost ways to reduce energy and greenhouse gas emissions. My name is Jenny Woods and I'm a project coordinator at the Local Government Commission. I want to provide just a quick overview of the webinar and go over some logistics before I turn it over to our speakers today. Local governments across the state of California are coming up with creative, low-cost ways to reduce energy and greenhouse gas emissions. This webinar will highlight 3 creative approaches that local governments are undertaking to meet energy and climate change goals, while also staying within their limited municipal budgets. The webinar will begin by highlighting the innovative Climate Corps Bay Area program, a 10-month program that matches AmeriCorps volunteers with local governments in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The webinar will also highlight the unique low-cost partnerships between students and professors from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and 2 local governments in an effort to develop community climate action plans. Lastly, the webinar will highlight regional efforts undertaken in the San Diego region as part of SANDAG's Energy Roadmap program for local governments. This program has helped reduce duplication and will help meet energy and climate change goals at the regional level. So just for some background, this webinar is being put on by the statewide Energy Efficiency Collaborative. SEEC is an alliance to help cities and counties reduce greenhouse gas emissions and save energy. SEEC is a collaboration between 3 statewide nonprofit organizations and California's 4 investor-owned utilities. During the webinar today, everyone will be muted except the person speaking. Due to the large number of participants, we ask that you type your comment in the question box. And Atisha will be summarizing those during the question and answer portion following each speaker, time permitting. We will also have a question and answer period for any remaining questions at the very end of the webinar. Any of the questions we don't get to, we'll ask the presenters to respond to after the webinar, and we will make that available at our website. If you have any IT questions, you can also write in the question box and write IT at the beginning of your message. Presentations, fact sheets, and questions answered after the webinar and a recording of the webinar will be available at www.lgc.org/seek/webinars. When you log out of the webinar, you will be asked to complete a survey. Please take 5 minutes to provide us with input, which will help us improve future webinars and presentations. Choose future webinar topics and make sure that these webinars are as useful for you as possible. We have a great list of speakers, starting with Kristen Brubaker, so I want to go ahead and get started. Kristen Brubaker is the Climate Corps Program Director for Bay Area Community Resources. Climate Corps assists local governments and nonprofits to implement climate change mitigation initiatives and make measurable GHG emission reductions in communities they service, while training participants to be sustainability leaders. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen and let her get started.
Thank you so much. So as Jenny mentioned, I help direct a program that works with local governments and nonprofits on climate change mitigation, and we'll be talking specifically about how that program provides resources for communities. Next slide. So to start with, I want to give a little bit of background info and context. And I know you guys all know that are very comfortable with these issues, but our program has been based on addressing these needs, so I want to review them quickly. In general, in California, we're seeing some great successes on GHG emission reduction projects at an individual level. Unfortunately, we're still failing to achieve large-scale results, and this is especially true with local governments. We have some great mandates out there, such as AB 32, to direct us, and local governments are working to hit these targets. But oftentimes, resources are either not there at all or stretched too thin to offer full-time staff, etc., to really be devoted towards sustainability. So what we're seeing as work is being started, but then also stalled. It's the all too familiar stalling point between planning and implementation. In addition, not only are the financial resources often not there for the local governments, but we're also seeing that there's a lack of trained professionals ready to take on the work, sort of a resource allocation problem. There are students and graduates who are well trained and educated for the positions, but lack real-world experience. And additionally, there's often a labor pool that might be prepared, but they don't really know what positions to look for, or maybe don't have the experience working for the public sector or local government. Next slide. And actually one more slide. So the solution that we've developed is Climate Corps Bay Area, which is an AmeriCorps program. And AmeriCorps, for those of you who are not familiar, is a national service program sort of modeled as the domestic Peace Corps. AmeriCorps is designed to provide resources to address critical defined community needs, such as greenhouse gas emission reduction. And as an AmeriCorps program, Climate Corps works specifically with cities or nonprofits that wouldn't really be able to take next steps without additional help. Climate Corps addresses the issues of the lack of resources by providing a platform where members can get experience working in climate change mitigation while serving a community who otherwise would not be able to take steps towards implementation of these sustainability initiatives. Because we're an inexpensive program, we're able to provide a full-time person basically for a year for a fraction of what it would typically cost for a full-time employee. So we have three main goals that all of our Climate Corps members work on. The first is to make measurable reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in each of the communities that we partner with. The second is to get communities involved in these emission reduction projects, so really getting those extra volunteers out there and working on the projects. And the third is to increase civic participation. And this is both the civic participation of the community members or employees who are volunteering for these projects, as well as our actual Climate Corps members who continue the civic engagement throughout and after their Climate Corps service year. Next slide. Looking a bit at the creation of Climate Corps was developed through the partnership of two nonprofits, Strategic Energy Innovations, SEI, who provides the environmental support and direction, and BACR, Bay Area Community Resources, who has the experience of running and managing AmeriCorps programs since the inception of AmeriCorps in 1994. And as an AmeriCorps program, Climate Corps is funded both nationally and locally, with a little bit over half of our funds coming from our partner sites, the local nonprofits and local governments that we work with. And we're managed through California Volunteers, which is the state AmeriCorps commission. Next slide. So in addition to providing local governments resources in the actual Climate Corps member, our role as the facilitator of the partnership is something that we found is really key. There's a lot of government agencies that might already utilize volunteers or have internship programs for climate activities, but oftentimes they lack the structure or the resources to really create a long-term program or to turn an internship into something more than just providing the very basic level of support. Climate Corps then acts to provide that program structure. Because we're working with both the agency and actually managing the members really throughout the entire service year, so from before the service year begins with recruitment of the members, working with the interviewing and the placing, and then managing throughout the entire service year, we really make sure that both the city and the member get what they want out of the partnership. And what we found is this support structure is essential to success because it ensures proper training, feedback, successful development of climate mitigation process, and really being able to form those next steps that we always need. Next slide. So one of the great things about that broad goal I mentioned a bit ago of just making measurable reductions in greenhouse gas emissions is it allows our members to do really a range of activities. I've listed just a few of the different, some of the work that our members have done in the past 2 years, but you'll notice that they really partner with businesses to schools, and their projects range from transportation to energy efficiency, waste reduction to education. So we're really able to expose our members to a lot of what's going on out there in sustainability and GHG emission reduction and allow them to get a lot of experience. Next slide. So looking a little bit more in depth, I've listed just a few example projects that are working with local governments. Right now we do have a member who has been working on the development of a climate action plan in the city of San Pablo, and it's actually just passed the SEEC process and is close to completion. In addition to working with the CAP, the member actually has also been working on weatherization of 5 different municipal buildings and the police department. Looking at Alameda County, we have one member who's working on large-scale multi-county solar procurement project, and at the completion of that project, it will be somewhere in between 40 and 50 megawatts, so definitely a very large project that that member is working on. Additionally, in Alameda County, we have members working on composting, waste reduction, purchasing, as well as carpooling. And then a lot of our members are working in different capacities with Energy Upgrade California, and this is true in both San Mateo County and Sonoma County. Next slide. So we're only completing our second year. It will be completed in about 6 more weeks, but we've already shown some great results. Last year alone, our members were responsible for approximately 12 million pounds of GHG emission reductions, or approximately 9,000 metric tons. So some really big numbers that we're responsible for, or that our members are responsible for, I should say. And then one of the results that I'm most proud of is that 85% of our members from the first year were able to find careers, obtain careers in sustainability immediately after the service year was over. So this is just showing that we're able to train them and make sure that they're prepared to sort of take that next step and continue working on sustainability for these local governments. Already this year, I mentioned we have about 6 weeks left. Out of our 30 members, approximately 12 of them already have their next steps planned, and out of that 12, 5 to 6 of them are actually able to be retained by the local government or nonprofit that they're working with. These are situations where the local governments basically saw how essential the work they were doing was, and were able to create a position specifically for these members. Next slide. So as a new program, we're definitely in the process of learning, but we have definitely got some lessons learned already, and some of the things that I think are most important. First of all, really being able to provide the flexibility to address each individual's community needs. And one of the things that has allowed us to be successful is that we're able to meet the partner site where they are, whether they're just starting a climate action plan or if they've passed their climate action plan years ago and they're just expanding or developing a new sustainability project. We also have a great network which allows us to bring in candidates who are experienced and then allow us to train them and make sure that they're able to have the training that they need to really take ownership of their projects and hit the ground running. We are able to provide support throughout the service year and make sure that they have all of those resources that they need, that they really can be as effective as possible in their positions. One of the lessons I thought was most interesting is during our first year, it was really surprising to me how many projects we worked on where they each had similar goals, but the agencies, the different cities or counties, really didn't know that the other project existed. For example, there was actually a situation where 2 different counties were working and using members for almost the exact same scope to work on Energy Upgrade California, but neither county actually knew what the other county was doing. So really by creating a forum where members are able to talk to members and agencies are able to communicate with each other, we've found that this can really create a situation where they can learn from each other. And we've also seen that by opening this forum, we're able to build more partnerships and higher collaboration within our projects. And then lastly, I think that we've realized how important it is to create career paths for our members. Because we have so many of our members that stay within the sustainability field and specifically within the Bay Area, we found that creating a strong network once again helps us to further the success of the projects and increase collaboration. And then also, years down the line, just being able to have that network to check in with to see what's going on in the different fields and in the different cities. Next slide. So looking sort of long term, as I mentioned, we are just completing our second full year with Climate Corps, and right now we're really focusing on improving the program as much as possible. We want to make sure that it's at the stage where it can be scalable and replicable and effective regardless of where we put it. With that said, we have already been approached by many agencies throughout California asking for assistance, and ultimately we have goals to eventually expand statewide to address these needs. And we're particularly excited about possibly looking more into regional collaborations to help us really better define and address the needs of the regions, as well as take away lessons to sort of implement in new regions and statewide in new areas that we move into. Next slide. So I just want to say thank you to our partners this year and my contact information if anyone has any questions that don't get answered at this point of time.
Thank you, Kristen. That was a great presentation. We really appreciate you being here today. If anyone has questions for Kristen, please write them into the question box and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. And since I don't see any questions right now, we are going to move on to our next speaker. Dr. Adrienne Grieve is an associate professor in city and regional planning at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. Her areas of research include planning for climate change, urban streams, and urban ecology. Dr. Grieve is co-author of the book Local Climate Action Planning. At Cal Poly, she serves as project manager for development of the California Climate Adaptation Policy Guide under contract with the California Emergency Management Agency. Dr. Grieve has also been awarded 2 contracts to develop local climate action plans as part of the 2-quarter studio sequence at Cal Poly, City of Benicia and City of San Luis Obispo. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne so she can give her presentation.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about working with academia broadly because it can take the form of working with a studio class where the faculty salary is covered by their salary at the university because it's part of their teaching load, and the students get academic credit and aren't paid hourly. So it ends up being a very low-cost way. But there are other ways of collaborating with a university as well, where it can be an hourly wage for faculty with a team of students, often graduate students, that work with them. That also comes out as being lower cost. And I've done projects both ways. I'm going to talk specifically about as part of a course because that's the lowest cost option. And so if you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to kind of cover what to keep in mind when you're working with a university, in particular when you're working with classes. What does the CAP development process look like, or a climate action plan development process? And then what are some of the steps? And at the end, I have a few tips for how do you approach a university, because this is not something that only Cal Poly does. There are several other universities, certainly in California, that are working with local jurisdictions to develop plans. Next slide. Just for background for everyone, is just a kind of a basis of what we're talking about. The first time I had a studio work on a climate plan was the City of Benicia. You'll note it's in 2008, meaning this predates CEQA requirements for greenhouse gases. It was very new then, and so there are many fewer sets of guidance dictating content. At that time, we finished in April 2009, and the city adopted it just 6 months later. 1 year later, next slide, I taught another 2-quarter studio. So 2-quarter studio, Cal Poly's on a quarter system. So these are 2 10-month, or I guess 11-month if you include finals, 10-week, I should say, quarters. And then I often kept a few students on an hourly till April to do final editing and touch-up. But we finished in April 2010, and it took 2 years for the city to update projections because the guidance around climate change was so dynamic in this area. So the original plan the students did included participation in California First, the solar panels on your roof, and then paying for them through your property tax. That program was stopped by the federal government. You then need to take it out of the plan, redo projections, and have a host of other additional strategies to make up for the reductions associated with that strategy. So the city updated all of those projections, went back to public outreach, got more staff feedback, and then developed the CEQA documents to go with the plan. And it went to Planning Commission this month. Next slide. So a couple things to keep in mind when you're working with a university is, first, we're on an academic calendar. And so if it's an independent team that's being paid hourly, it's less of an issue. But if it's being taught through a class, you need to understand the timing of the semester or quarter in which the class is being taught. And so there's a hard end date. And there are academic holidays and things that you need to understand are there. And so that's a very important piece. It's also to understand that there are pedagogical outcomes. So it's not just like working with a consultant where it's just about the product. in that when I taught these two classes, yes, it was over about 6 months, maybe 7. I spent the first month or two teaching the students about climate planning and about climate science. And so they knew what the IPCC or ICLEI and some of the big players were in the climate planning game. And so there are a set of teaching outcomes that are associated with the development of the plan. And yes, most of the time is there, but there's a parallel set of goals. And that if you're working with a university that's using it as part of a class, to be aware of that there's a set of teaching outcomes as well. There's also student diversity. And I mean this in as the lead instructor can give a bad grade, but that doesn't help the final plan. There's often a lot of circle editing and things that happens, and often I will hire graduate students to do final editing and shore things up, but it can be uneven, and that's something to recognize up front. Also, be aware of the strengths and weaknesses. Students bring a huge amount to the table. I come into a community with somewhere between 15 and 25 students. That's a really big workforce, and the studio meets 15 hours a week, so I have a lot of time and a lot of man hours. And they bring a huge amount of energy and creativity, partly because they don't even have to think outside of the box because they don't really have a full box as yet, in a way. And one of the ways where this really shows up is in outreach. With that many people that don't have to be anywhere 9 to 5, and also are willing to spend weekends or evenings doing things, you can actually access a much broader set of citizens and stakeholders because they can do non-traditional outreach. One of the downfalls is experience. They're in their early 20s, so they don't have the world experience to kind of realistically assess feasibility considerations. They can do rough financial estimates, but they just don't have the life experience to do that well. But to be aware going in that there are things that go well and don't. Prepare your city staff and figure out how to negotiate that relationship, because suddenly there will be a lot of 20-year-olds around, which is fine, and it can be different with every city, but climate planning crosses so many sectors that it's important to prepare your staff. And be clear about expectations. For a student project, I always say the end product on a studio is an internal staff draft, and that the city should expect to have to go back through public review and to do one more full edit. And I don't think students, it's appropriate for them to do the SEEC document, partly because SEEC documents are subject to legal scrutiny, which I don't think is appropriate for the outcome from a class. Next slide. This is just a rough overview of the way the two plans worked. Is research, you begin outreach, and of course outreach extends through the whole process. A policy review, and the first quarter you come up with a document for the policy audit, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And then the second quarter is really about developing GHG reduction strategies and quantifying the reductions that come from those strategies, and ultimately resulting in a draft cap. Next slide. So public outreach, and this is one of the real strengths of collaborating with an academic institution. Students are often very tech savvy. They enjoy this. They're often also very graphically savvy and quite good at it. So digital, from Facebook to websites to digital surveys to the production of videos to events, some of that are more common like farmers markets, community workshops, to some of the less traditional of grocery stores, schools, man-on-the-street surveys, and other more fun kinds of interactive where you can actually access members of the community that don't attend workshops as frequently. Next slide. So this is an example of the website that the students developed for Benicia, and they kept a blog. They had surveys, tell us what you think, resources, hosted videos, gave updates as to where we were, and this is just a screenshot from several years ago. And you work out with the city about vetting the content so that the students just don't do anything that they want on there, but to make sure it still is accurately representing the city. Next slide. This is a screen capture from the San Luis Obispo website that was developed. Very similar in many ways. The students developed the logo at the top. Next slide. This is a workshop where the students decided they wanted a more interactive community workshop. Instead, they created 5 stations. This is a station where it was about access to services, so mixed use kinds of things. And every attendee of the workshop rotated between 5 focused stations to keep people talking and interactive. Next slide. This is a trip to a high school, and this is something that I don't know if it would have been more difficult in a different situation, but we went into the high school, and what was really powerful here is we did a visioning workshop with some student clubs and a couple science classes where their teachers agreed to let their students work with us. But one of the parts of the community that often doesn't show up as frequently at community workshops in the evening are families with children. And so in this case, we encouraged the students to bring their parents to our workshop later in the week, and we actually had 17 high school students and unbelievably high attendance at the community workshop. So from that perspective, it was a very successful event. And part of what I think made it possible was that we did an hour and a half of workshop, and then the last half hour to 45 minutes, I had my students give a how do you pick your major, how do you pick your university, college panel for the high school students, which benefited the school as well. Next slide. In San Luis Obispo, we also went into the middle school with very similar goals to that of the high school in Benicia. And this was great fun and really interesting. They came up with strategies that even made it into the draft plan. You can go on to the next slide. This is a great example of some of the creativity if you give them enough freedom. We had low attendance at San Luis Obispo at our first community meeting, and the students decided we needed to be more active and not just have an informational booth at a farmer's market, but something that drew people in. So they made a game show. And it was on Valentine's Day, and my student went to a thrift store and showed up without instruction in that get-up. And it ended up being incredibly popular. It was a game show about GHG reduction strategies, but lots of children wanted the candy and dragged their parents over, but it ended up being great fun and quite popular. Next slide. This is one other strategy. We got permission from several grocery stores, and when you have 20 students, you can actually have, that's a poster that has 10 potential GHG reduction strategies, and we were looking at community acceptance and support for those strategies. So coming in and out, I think this picture's at a Vaughn's. Shoppers were able to put a red or a green sticker to indicate their support, or put full comments on Post-it notes, which you can't see here. But again, we were able to do this, and this got us access to a much wider swath of the community than would normally show up at a workshop. Next slide. So that was all of the outreach that extends through all the process, but that is something that a lot of communities I saw as a real benefit to working with the university. The policy document, you use the same 20 students to talk to city staff and read every bit of adopted policy in the city that they can get their hands on, and evaluate what are cities already doing that reduces GHG emissions, and are there any policies currently on the books that are not consistent with GHG reduction goals. And this is a great starting point for developing subsequent strategies. It's a bit of a gap analysis. Next slide. So going back, that completes that top line, and then it just leaves the strategy development. Can you go to the next slide? This includes targeted outreach, where students met with green building nonprofits in Benicia. We had meetings with the port and with Valero at the refinery to truly vet and talk to key stakeholders in the community. Research, and again, this is where creativity comes in, and sometimes you have to rein them back and talk about feasibility, but you get some very creative ideas about how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They then calculate and estimate the reductions that will result and phase them over time. And of course, this is an iterative process. As you develop strategies, you go ask the utility if it's a water strategy, and get feedback and then refine it. And so this becomes an iterative process, and that's why staff needs to be prepared. Next slide. So how might a community set up such a collaboration? In those two cases, the city approached our department asking if our CAP could be part of, their CAP could be part of our 2-quarter studio sequence. And that's certainly the way it can be done in some cases. I've also seen at least one example where a city wrote into the RFP for their climate plan that the consulting firm had to collaborate with an academic institution and include students in that process. A couple things to keep in mind when kind of defining, and it should be unique in each case, is clearly establish the project scope, what the student effort is going to result in, establish a timeline, but keeping in mind the academic calendar. Setting expectations for both parties. So if you're scheduling workshops, who's reserving those rooms? Who's making the handouts? Who's keeping the minutes? Who's taking responsibility? The academic side can do that, or the city can do that, but that's something that has to be outlined up front. The other thing you'll see at the bottom there is making sure supervision of the students is specifically defined. In the case of Benicia, they didn't want staff meeting with students without a graduate student or a faculty member present, which was just fine. We simply worked with that. In San Luis Obispo, I met with all of the departments in the city up front and clearly described my expectations both for the students and how I thought the meetings would go, and how we would negotiate setting up the meetings, but ultimately they were fine without a faculty member being there. But that's up to each jurisdiction. Next slide. And a few final thoughts. Collaboration with the university is low cost. You get a lot of high energy, very creative students involved. It does require staff participation in the student process. A huge amount of GHG reduction strategy development is iterative, and to also be aware that you're going to get an internal staff draft at the end of it, meaning after the studio is done, there's additional refinement, there's SEQL work, and then the full adoption process. And since the adoption process can be prolonged, it really doesn't fit with an academic schedule. And I think that that's it. Last slide. That is it. So I'll either now at the end, be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne, for that really interesting presentation. We did have one quick question of someone was wondering if they could get access to those caps that you guys were working on. So I'll work with you afterwards, and we will try to make those available on our website if that's possible, on the lgc.org SEEC website. And with that, we'll move on to our last presentation. If anyone else has questions for Adrienne, please type those into the question box, and we'll get to those at the end of Susan's presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Susan. Susan Friedman is the Senior Regional Energy Planner for the San Diego Association of Governments. SANDAG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization and Council of Governments for the 19 jurisdictions of San Diego County, comprising 3.1 million people and 7.2 million acres. She manages SANDAG's energy and climate change planning, including a $1.7 million local government energy efficiency partnership with San Diego Gas and Electric called the Energy Roadmap Program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about SANDAG's Energy Roadmap Program, which is our energy saving program for our local governments. And it's a partnership, as it was mentioned, with San Diego Gas and Electric that we've had since 2010. We're expecting that to continue through 2014. Next slide, please. Just overview of the presentation. I'll say why SANDAG's involved as a regional agency in working with local governments on energy and climate, as well as what an energy roadmap is, some of the services and chapters that are involved in the document, what we do that customizes it for each jurisdiction, as well as our program savings we found and resources available to the cities. And definitely some lessons learned and findings from going through this for 2.5 years right now, and looking forward to 2.5 more and seeing where we get with energy savings. Next slide, please. And we can skip this one. So anyway, as far as SANDAG's role in energy planning, we've had a long history of working on energy policy. It dates back into the 70s and 80s, but I've shown the most recent items on the slide. In particular, our regional energy strategy, last adopted in 2009. It's really the energy policy blueprint for the region and focuses on areas of influence that local governments have. So it's not a catch-all of everything that either the utility has to do or private business. This is definitely a local government focus. In addition, we have a regional energy working group, and that working group is comprised of key stakeholders, including elected officials, business, environmental groups, social groups, universities, among others, as well as SDG&E, our local utility, and our local nonprofit, the California Center for Sustainable Energy. But the Energy Working Group was formed as an implementation measure of our 2003 Regional Energy Strategy, and it's really been meeting about monthly since 2004. And this idea of the agency, the regional agency, taking a larger role in helping out our local governments in energy planning, the concept came out of the Regional Energy Working Group, where there were lots of discussions on why there were really only 3 cities that were ever really active, or 3 jurisdictions out of the 19 were very active on energy programs and energy retrofits. And then you had 16 more cities that were either very lightly involved or not involved at all. And so that began what became our first pilot with the city of Carlsbad, and that was back in 2006. And that was through the Energy Working Group and working with the Cal Center for Sustainable Energy and SDG&E. We sat down with that local government and cross-section of their staff to find out what they were looking to get out of a project as far as energy efficiency measures, whether it was policies or work on the municipal buildings, and then see what we could provide. And we worked as, SANDAG worked as that facilitator through what our local government staff had called or described the alphabet soup of utility programs, saying that they had tried a couple times to get involved with doing energy retrofits at the municipal level, but you know, once you find out about one program, they say, well, then you have to go to this other program for lighting and this other program for heating and ventilation, and then so on and so on. And so they hit a point where they usually just give up. So we were going to try and fill that gap so that cities wouldn't give up. And I'd say it was a pretty successful program, and the council received it very well. That happened with Carlsbad. And based on that, we were able to move forward and secure some funding from the California Energy Commission to help co-fund 2 more pilot cities. And that was over 2007 through 2009. And that, again, was trying to create an energy management plan for them, which then subsequently now became this energy roadmap program, which we have made available to 16 of our 19 local jurisdictions. And just quick caveat on that, 3 jurisdictions have their own SDG&E local government partnerships, so there are rules about duplicating efforts, and so we do not perform energy efficiency tasks for those jurisdictions. We do collaborate with them a lot, but they run their own programs. So from the experience with the pilot, SANDAG really, there was a lot of buy-in from elected officials and leadership to have SANDAG take on that role as a conduit to our local governments to get engaged in energy-saving projects. Next slide, please. So from that, this is what the energy roadmap looks like. It's really a type of energy management plan, and it's a report that identifies energy efficiency and conservation opportunities for each jurisdiction, and it sets a framework for action on local energy issues. Everything's voluntary measures, and the report is really geared toward this prettier looking report. It's geared toward people who are energy lay people as well as decision makers. So, and once this report is done, we continue to work with each city, their public works staff and other staff, planning staff, to implement measures identified in this roadmap. Different from the first two speakers, I will say that the Energy Roadmap Program is really geared towards city staff and decision makers. It's a public document, but what we're trying to do is get that buy-in and level of education and interest in energy and greenhouse gas reducing projects. And these are governments that traditionally don't have any energy staff. This is usually the third or fourth type of job you're adding to somebody's plate. So really our focus is hopeful with once we move forward with the roadmap, then these cities would be more engaged to do even greater activities and reach out more in their communities. Next slide. So some general comments about the overall program. We really based it on barriers that were experienced from the pilots and that we saw with some of the other local governments outside of the region. SDG&E funds the bulk of the program, all the energy efficiency related components. SANDAG does provide clean transportation components, and we do that through our own programs and funding sources. And some of the key points on the program really are that we are trying to connect the dots with the city between energy and things that they're already doing. So that could be general plan updates, climate action plans, other types of projects, but really showing with the energy assessments and other measures that we identify, we show ways that the energy roadmap can help complement what they're doing as well as help implement their climate plan or sustainability plan. In addition, we leverage resources. The local nonprofit, again, California Center for Sustainable Energy, they have projects they're doing that we know work with local governments, so we bring them to the table at appropriate times. Our iCommute to help with employee commutes. SDG&E has a host of programs, the new construction programs, as well as efficiency, as well as renewables. So we try to bring in, based on city interest and what's appropriate, bring who we can to the table to help expand and enhance the program. Something that was critical for our local government and that SANDAG is known for is that we were bringing in through a very competitive procurement process an engineering assistance that was going to be technology neutral and non-biased. What I mean by that is no one was affiliated with a particular company's product. The recommendations don't say a particular company's type of, say, light bulbs. It's just a certain type of specification. So everything had to be economically viable, have energy-saving potential, and then this was further backed up because they would be appropriate for getting rebates or incentives that the California Public Utilities Commission had approved. So that was just another level of making sure that this was acceptable technology. Lastly, we have tools that continue to stay with the city to document their energy performance and whatnot. Next slide. So the chapters of the glossy document, it's really focused on saving energy in city operations, and then the second half is saving energy in the community. The biggest part of that is really focusing on municipal operations and kind of getting the local governments to walk the talk. So energy engineering assessments of municipal sites. That could be your sports park, that could be your firehouse, city hall, and whatnot. We also look at training and some other items, but I'll get into those over the next couple of slides. So next slide, please. As for the energy assessments, they take part in 3 stages. And we're really gearing this based on experience of local governments receiving a 40-page audit, a technical document that you'd either fall asleep on page 8 of, or you just wouldn't get to the findings. So we split up the audit components into 3 phases. The first we like to call a report card, which is really a 1 double-sided color page, lots of charts and graphics that give a snapshot of how a building is performing energy-wise. It shows your month-over-month annual usage, shows where the bills you're paying, what parts taxes, what parts the actual energy consumed, what parts demand, and others. The middle part or the lower end of your screen, you'll see 3 different charts which have it's really where we're benchmarking each site that you're able to benchmark. Some sites you can't do, that's determined by the U.S. EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So we use that, the red one's Energy Stars benchmark, which shows, I'll just say, the national average and the state averages are on the left side. The city's building is on the right side. So this is, as an example, looking at the city of San Marcos' City Hall. So they're performing better than the national average. And as far as energy performance, electricity and natural gas separately, those are done through a California end-use survey. So we brought that in as well. And the City Hall is also performing better there. I wasn't going to show a bad example, basically, of one of our cities. But at a time where the energy report cards are done for every municipal site with an electricity or natural gas bill, in addition to that piece, every site is then logged in to have computer access on SDG&E's Energy Waves, which is the electronic version of their utility bills, which some of our smaller cities have not been working electronically yet, and as well as establishing a password and a user profile for each city on the EPA Portfolio Manager. Next slide, please. So the second part, I'll say, the energy assessments, or if there were problems in that report card, maybe something looked askew or there were spikes in different months or the staff recommended it, we'd move forward with a secondary energy assessment. And then based on that secondary assessment, come up with findings. And so what you're seeing here is really, instead of we pull all that technical information into a very user-friendly format that becomes the first chapter of each city's energy roadmap. So again, this is really written for the decision maker and others that do not live and breathe energy. So something very, not simple, but explains things, I think, in a concise manner, doesn't get too detailed. We include with the roadmap a technical appendice, and that has every energy audit that's done and all the technical information, and the city's own department facility staff also have that information. Next slide. So as far as the local planning, that's another chapter inside the roadmap, as well as something that we work on over several months and continue to work on with each city. The target is to integrate energy considerations into land use and transportation planning, the areas of influence that local governments have. So we're really looking at the building energy codes, your Title 24, your green codes, REACH codes, as well as energy efficient building upgrades that are available. And that could be supporting financing like PACE programs for that, or supporting Energy Upgrade California. So we explain what the role is that local governments can have in that area and build up some education about them and how to get further involved. Also, I'd like to say that we have all of this is consistent with California's long-term energy efficient strategic plan, and that really maps out a lot of the visionary direction that the state wants local governments to go in to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and reduce energy consumption. Next slide. So in addition to the planning, there's education and training. It's actually 3 chapters in the roadmap. I'm showing just one of them, but the first one addresses municipal staff. We identify, a lot of people don't know, there's so much free education, workshops, and training available in each region of the state through your local utility, and so as well as third-party programs. So we identify different types of training that are available as far as general Energy 101 workshops, or what is climate change. And then we also are able to, working with SDG&E, we're able to provide or offer no-cost or lower-cost training. For example, the Title 24 training or Certified Energy Manager, Lead Green Associate, those types of things, to the local governments that we're working with. And that's something we'll be expanding on going forward. As far as working with the communities on the saving energy in the community, the planning is the largest section, but with the education, part of that is we want to market energy programs that are out there, DG&Es as well as third parties, to the local constituents in each area. And this originally scared some cities. wanted to make sure we worded it correctly then. We are not asking a city to take on developing or running their own energy program yet. They're still at learning the energy usage at their own buildings. So this is really serving as a conduit to your community. We provide all the information and web links to what's available for local governments or for their constituents, which they can then easily cut and paste onto their own websites or have as handouts at civic centers and whatnot. Next slide, please. So as far as where we're at, we've basically gotten through 7 cities that are done. Oh, we can skip this slide too. I'm skipping over all the clean transportation for you guys. We've gone through about 7 cities of the 13 we're targeting in these first couple of years. The city of Vista is actually in print right now or getting printed. We have another 6 that are underway right now and 2 more to reach out to during 2012. As far as the order of the cities, when we met with them, we asked what kind of quarter or time of year they wanted to start up the program, and we went with that best we could. Other than our 3 pilot cities that had already gotten free services, Carlsbad, Poway, and Solana Beach, we are leaving them till the end so we can make sure we provide the same services to each of the other cities. And just a comment on the services there. We're looking at an estimate is about $100,000 worth of free engineering assistance, technical services to audit the buildings as well as meet with the cities, help them move toward implementing their energy-saving measures. And in addition, the SANDAG technical staff on the planning and the facilitation side and education and just complete coordination of getting buy-in on energy. So next slide, please, but just to give paint a picture there. It's some of the savings. We can move over this. I'll just say that you can get a lot of energy savings, at least in San Diego region, by switching your outdoor lighting rate. So some of them are over $100,000. Next slide. And then the next one here just showcases some of the annual bill savings as well as energy savings. In the energy roadmap, we showcase the greenhouse gas reductions as well. And this is what we've done through the engineering assessments. And then moving forward in the next couple of years, the focus is on now implementing these measures at each city. Next, please. So as far as continuing efforts, we already know we need to do more on project management as far as implementing those building retrofit measures. And we're figuring that out right now just through seeing that the cities have more need than we had anticipated. And that's just due to a lot of staffing cuts. You know, there is no program for this at the local city. So we're trying to document that as best we can so that we can see if there's some themes that come out of that and how to help shape future programs. Energy planning, training opportunities I mentioned. There's beacon awards that the state gives out. And so everyone that goes through an energy roadmap, we want to make sure that the local cities can get recognized through the beacon award process. And then we are going to continue performance monitoring. Last slide, please. Next slide. As far as some of the lessons learned, I will say, I mean, there's been real positive things in that we've had over 160 energy report cards done and over 70 secondary energy audits performed for municipal sites here in San Diego County. And another thing that was good, we knew ahead of time from experience the other way to gain buy-in for doing an energy program from the planning directors, the city manager's office, the electeds, and whatnot. And so we really use SANDAG's committee processes to get the word out and to regularly circle back with them. Another one that we could do better, regular communications with the city and then with the subcontractors, because the audits can take months. And so at first we didn't think to keep circling back and just letting the city know this is ongoing, this is ongoing. But if you don't just keep letting them know and touching base, then it falls off people's radars. And so that's a lesson learned that we're going to improve on going forward, as well as this helps us figure out what staffing levels we need. But in general, it's just the collaboration with each of the city and then circling back with our SANDAG departments and then identifying through the cities so far what the next layer of barriers we're finding for local governments that are not big on doing energy measures, how to get them engaged. It's been an exciting process and keeps us on our toes, and we're happy to move forward with it. So that ends my talk right now. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation, Susan. We had a question for you about the energy roadmaps and if they were available online.
They will be. I'd say we originally didn't, SANDAG didn't want to be the first one to put them out. We wait until it's gone before, most of the cities have it go before their city council as an information item or presentation item. So at first we were going to wait for 3, and we've just been poor on our web management. But it is our plan to have in July, while we have some downtime, we're going to get the website updated, and we'll have at least 6 of the energy roadmaps up next month.
Very good. So we'll keep an eye out for that. We also had a more general question: what resources are available to local governments in developing their climate action plans, online trainings, workshops, and so on? The short answer is yes, there are resources available, and we can create a list of those key resources and put them up on the SEEC webinar site for you. We also had a question, a comment and a related question. A CAP should consider more than energy, sustainable food and water supplies, as well as population in the economy, for example. And the question was, has anyone developed appropriate food sources and supply strategies and plans? So I'm not sure if any of the speakers have some insight on that.
I will say that there's one thing that, this is Adrienne. I can think of, well, I know of one community that started down the road in terms of food, and so you see a lot of local food types of strategies that often get housed without GHG reduction, partly because so many communities in California are food exporters, where if you include all of the GHG emissions of food transport, the way to cut them is to undercut their economy. So I know that the jurisdiction I'm thinking of stepped back from aggressively pursuing it because they're a food producer. But I do know that there are a lot, and I don't want to say majority, but there are many that have something about local food in them, but it ends up being a sticky issue because you're often tying your cap to your GHG inventory. And so it starts being an issue about where you draw your boundaries and what's in and what's out. And I would add adaptation to the list of things that ought to also be in a climate plan, which is increasingly expanding with time in terms of what things are included.
Very true. Thank you for that answer. And then we had a final question: what might be the best example of a community getting residences and buildings to install solar panels? How is the community engaged, and what role did the utility play?
I didn't hear the front of that question.
It was a question about any success stories of communities installing solar panels and community engagement and the role of the utilities.
Well, I can speak to the outside of the community engagement part, because we're really more centered right now on the education and building up the resources within the local government. But it's good to have the utility involved from near the start there, because a lot of the time the rebates or other incentives go through them. But I'd say also we have the local nonprofit California Center for Sustainable Energy, and so they run a solar program, the California Solar Initiative, and both SDG&E and CCSE have been extremely active with doing outreach and workshops about installing solar, whether it's residential or for commercial and public agency buildings. So I think we have a lot of knowledge, or people are very aware of it. When it comes to getting funding, though, to get the panels done, I'd say still nobody wants to use their general fund as a city. So the California Energy Commission's low-interest loans have been really helpful. I think they're at about 3% right now, and they have maybe about, I want to say, $15 or $18 million worth of funds available for local government energy projects. And then, yeah, really relaying that to the community that this would reduce their energy usage, make them more independent, as well as reduce greenhouse gases. But it's good to involve, I'd say, be collaborative as possible.
I think I can add a little bit to that. One, certainly collaborating with the utility. I know that there are situations where PG&E fronts the cost for solar panels, and then where they're installed pays their kind of average rate as though they're not there until they've paid them off. Kinds of situations, and I know that those collaborative kind of agreements with PG&E have occurred certainly in the region where I'm located. I also know that the legal framework for that's dynamic right now. I had a graduate student do his thesis on the network of laws around the Marin Energy Authority, and it's really complicated and it's dynamic right now, and I think that it'll settle through time. But in terms of facilitating the permitting and things for the slightly larger, not just the residential that'll do net metering, but for a feed-in tariff kind of situation, because it's so bound up in the location of other solar systems, particularly PV systems, that it's still a bit of a moving target, and people are still learning how to navigate the permitting framework. And so I think through time, you'll find that it's much easier, and it'll actually make some of the incentives more effective.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being on this webinar today. It looks like we are out of time. So if anyone has last-minute questions, please type them into the question box now, and we'll get those answered for you and up on the website. And as a reminder, all of our presenter emails are on the screen, so feel free to email them if you have any questions. And feel free to download their presentation when we add it to the SEEC website in the next day or two. And thank you again to all of our speakers who took the time to speak on this webinar today. And thanks to all of you who tuned in today to learn more about energy program funding, or low-cost ways to reduce energy. And we hope you found it useful. And please, again, take a few minutes to fill out the survey. As I mentioned, it really helps us improve future webinars. So this concludes our webinar for today, and thank you for joining us.